Let me get started. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to open this session on market design and transportation, and then David and Wayan are going to give us their perspective. So my view, kind of high-level view and beyond transportation, is a good place to look for interesting novel market design questions is when there is either a major technological change or major changes in the regulation, because that's when markets change and that's when you have a chance to introduce new designs. And in the case of transportation, of course, there are quite a few technological changes that you can think about. I think the most important one that's driving most of the changes that we're seeing is this one. Okay, it's not directly related to transportation. It's the cell phone that now everyone has in their pocket. And there are several reasons why this one technological change is so important for transportation. The first one, real-time location tracking, right? So you have a phone, we can know at every moment in time, where you are, where you were 10 minutes ago. So we can do lots of things with that, obviously critically important for transportation. The second one is that it can serve sort of as a control center in your pocket, right? So when you're calling an Uber or you're ordering something from DoorDash, you can have a fairly sophisticated UI that takes, seconds, compared that to trying to call a restaurant and place the order or communicate complex preference. But even more than that, you can use your phone to, unlock, Lime bike, right? So or pay for it right on the spot. So it's a really powerful control center that's available to everyone at every time. And the last thing, kind of flip side of that, it can also serve as automated dispatch, right? It's sort of whoever has a phone, we can now, instead of having humans, those of you who are old enough to remember how taxis work, they would constantly have this transmitter thing on their dashboard and like all these conversations all the time, who's going to the airport. That's kind of gone, right? So you have this dispatch in your pocket, well, probably on your dashboard, and again, very quickly, you can react as a driver to all kinds of requests, right? And the human may not even be participating in the dispatching process that can be automated. So dramatically reduces the cost of that. And unsurprisingly, with these with these abilities, transportation markets are just changing just incredibly dramatic. And the first domino to fall, the most obvious one, is taxi services. So here is a chart that's not going to surprise anyone. This is the price of the medallion. Medallion gives you a right to drive a taxi cab in New York City. And it was kind of stable for a while. It's about $200,000. These are not inflation adjusted, by the way. These are just absolute dollars. So it's even more dramatic than that. If you inflation adjust, then there was a run up right up to about 2014, and then Uber and Lyft entered the market, and the thing is just in a complete free fall. I mean, now they're basically worthless, right? So this is just kind of a really dramatic evidence, and unsurprisingly, there are now hundreds, maybe even more, research papers on Uber and Lyft studying all kinds of among other things, all kinds of market design issues. What's the optimal way of matching drivers to passengers? How to locate those drivers? Many people in this room have written those papers. So I'm actually not going to talk about this because I want to talk about new directions in market design. This one I feel it's still very active, but I'm not going to tell you much new by talking about this one. But it's it's an indicator of things to come in other parts of the industry. Now, before I get to specific examples, I want to make a couple of more general comments. So first of all, in transportation, what's interesting about market design is it happens on several levels, right? So if you think about kind of kidney exchange, right? So you just design the market, that's your market, that's it, right? You're kind of your policy maker and you run the market and kind of you can control that picture. Now, in transportation, regulators are involved, I think, more in kind of meta market design, right? So they set up all kinds of parameters, all kinds of rules, constraints, right? So again, for now, let's take with Uber and Lyft, you can have all kind of labor discussions. You can have, cap a number of cars that those services can have. So you kind of set the parameters. But then beyond that, that's where kind of more traditional market design comes in, the kind that we're thinking about, kind of matching markets, figuring out who's going to drive whom when. So kind of firms serve kind of as a second level of market design. So market design happens on two levels. That's already interesting, right? I think if you think about market design in this space, there are papers to be written both about the kind of the first bullet point and the second bullet point, and they're obviously complementary. But even more than that, in many of these markets, and I'll show some examples, you have multiple market designers competing. You have multiple firms within these constraints who are all competing with each other. So that's yet another set of issues to think about. What happens when you have several marketplaces competing with each other, and quite often they coexist. It's not like sometimes they do all collapse to just one monopolist, but quite often they manage to slice the market in a way that several ones coexist, and that raises a whole bunch of other exciting questions. And again, not surprisingly, in light of all of this, there are now hundreds of fascinating papers on Uber and Lyft and that industry. Now, what are the key challenges? What makes market design in this space interesting or complicated, which is sort of the same thing? Why can't we just do supply demand? We saw when Mar was showing the picture of supply and demand intersecting for electricity. Why can't we do it here? Well, there are several reasons. One is there's extreme heterogeneity, right? Because like every trip is special, right? So everyone is going from a different place to a different place. So right off the bat, you can't just do supply demand. But that's actually not enough, because thanks to work from the 1960s and 70s by Shapley-Shubik and by Kelson Crawford, and more later work by Hetfield and Milgram, we actually know that if preferences are substitutable, even with a lot of heterogeneity, you can still have similar things and still get the market clearing and all kinds of nice results with similar comparative statics. And that's not going to work here, because the key assumption for those models to work is everything is substitutable. All the preferences, all the things are substitutes. And here, and I'm going to mention a few of those, non-convexities, just like in the electricity market, and various complementarities are also very important. Just to name one, and you'll see them showing up in many other places and during my talk, when an Uber driver drops you off in the middle of nowhere, they're not happy, right? Why? Because they really want to be able to get someone, the next passenger, as fast as possible. So right off the bat, there are complementarities between different rights. Okay, and that's just a small example of it. And the last thing that makes this all complicated and fascinating and interesting and gives lots of work to people in this room is dynamics and uncertainty, right? It's not like you have, once a year you clear an RMP where you have everyone on one side, everyone on the other, and and then you go home for a year. This is happening continuously, and things are changing on both sides of the market. And so with that kind of bird's eye view, I want to talk about just 5 specific examples of of what I think are interesting transportation markets. And I do want to emphasize, this is just a small subset. When I sat down to just kind of start thinking about what I want to talk about, I excluded air travel, I excluded rail, I excluded, ocean shipping. I'm not going to talk about electric cars, where there are tons of interesting issues related to where you put kind of charging stations. I'm not going to talk about Turo, which is kind of car sharing, Airbnb for cars. So even with, kind of narrowed it down to those 5, which I think each of those is fascinating on its own. But just to give you a kind of heads up, there are others. If you don't like these 5 but want to work on transportation, there are more fascinating topics to think about. All right, so let me go through them in this order, just to kind of give a bit of a preview. The first 3 are not things I'm working on. So I'm an outsider. So, this is for, others to work on. The last 2 I am working on. So I'm going to say something, more specifically about what I'm doing. But again, there's tons of work for everyone. So let me start with those 3. And the first one I want to start with is trucking, which is a huge industry, right? Its size dwarfs ride-hailing industry, right? So they carry at this point, the latest number I found was about $875 billion in revenue just in the United States, right? And worldwide, obviously multiplied by a lot. It's about 72% of all US freight by weight or by value is actually similar. And so massive. And it is really decentralized. This is sort of as decentralized as it gets. So there are about 3.5 million truck drivers, so people who drive trucks, and there are 1.1 million carriers. Carriers are firms that provide services. So a lot of these firms are just a single driver. And IO economists here will be delighted that this industry is as fragmented as it gets. Like you worry about what happens when we go from 4 cell phone providers to 3. Here you don't have to worry about this. Top 50 carriers carry only 10% of the overall volume, right? So this is just, I don't know an industry that's as decentralized as this one, which is going to create problems, right? As you'll see in a moment. Now, at a first glance, right, I look at this, and this seems like a perfect example, perfect instance of the Shapley, Shubik, Kelso, Crawford, Hatfield, Milgram, two-sided matching markets with transfers and contracts, right? So we have, on one side, we have shippers. Shippers, the term, the lingo here, shippers are those who need something shipped, okay? So they're not people who ship stuff, those are carriers, those are people who require, they're clients. And then on the other side, you have carriers. Carriers are those who actually drive things. And then there are, loads, and these are bilateral contracts between shippers and carriers to deliver one load to somewhere else. Oh. All right, Parag, make sure that I get those 15 seconds back. Thanks. All right. Okay, so yeah, so what are the challenges? Why is it not that straightforward? And there are tons of challenges. And by the way, my suspicion for why there are so many grad students working on this, working on Uber and Lyft, but not on this, is because everyone has experience with Uber and Lyft. Very few people go to grad school after being truck drivers. But in terms of importance, it's just as important. I'm actually going to mention there was a job market paper out of MIT this year on the trucking industry. I'll mention that. But yeah, there's way more room. It was not market design. It was more sort of traditional IO-ish. All right. So what are the challenges? Why is there tons of work? Why am I encouraging everyone here to take a look at this industry? Well, so the immediate challenge is surge cost, right? You have this hugely decentralized industry. And traditionally, one part of the industry that I didn't mention were brokers. So the job of a broker, well, and still is, there's still lots of brokers, was to kind of be on the phone 24/7 and get calls from drivers to say, okay, I'm here, in Atlanta, I need to go home to Chicago for the weekend, can you find me a load? In the same way, carriers and these brokers would facilitate all this transaction. It was a huge industry, and it's obviously very labor intensive and very opaque. And as a result of this, a major problem in this industry is called deadheading, which is just when you drive empty, right? And I'm not going to go, by the way, I'm not going to talk about all the potential issues, but there is an environmental one, there is kind of waste of fuel. Like I take those as self-evident. So it's not that I don't care about the environment, it's just these problems are so obvious that they're not worth spending a lot of time talking about. So clearly this is a huge issue. And part of the game here in terms of designing better market is reducing these, right? And there's also an inefficiency in these truck drivers just sitting and waiting, right? That's on top of this. This is when they're actually actively driving empty. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty here, right? There's uncertainty both on the macro level when you make long-term forecasts. If you want to make a long-term, if you look at the past 3 years, you look at volumes of shipments, you look at the prices, it's as volatile as it gets. But also on the short level, right? There can be a snowstorm somewhere. There can be, some change in plans. So that's a big issue. And even once you sign a contract, like once you agreed on something, the game is not over, because shipments often get canceled or rescheduled for both sides reasons. All right, so both due to carriers and due to shippers. And preferences are complex and change all the time. Eliciting full profile is impractical. And the last thing, and this is this paper that I mentioned by Harrison Nguyen from out of MIT, and there's also an earlier paper by Tom Hubbard from about 20 years ago. Traditionally in this industry, even though you can think of it as very transactional, long-term relationships played a huge role. Okay, so how do they, but obviously you need spot markets as well. So how to coordinate them, how to make them coexist is highly non-trivial. Okay, so I'm going to skip this too. I'll just show you some screenshots of what's happening right now. When, I kind of said, I like things things are changing really rapidly. So these are just 4 out of many more to go on, App Store or Play Store apps for drivers. Right, these are the apps. This is Convoy, Uber Freight. These are kind of the high-tech Silicon Valley companies in this space, and then the other 2 are JB Hunt and RXO, which are these traditional broker shipping companies for also entering this from the their user base, and they're all trying to develop apps to match shippers and carriers, and even within one relationship, within one sort of load. This is actually a pretty complicated game. If you pay attention, this says place a bid. Some of them are posted prices. Some of them are run by a procurement auction. And here's the last thing. I'm going to move on to the next application. If you're trying to create, if you're a driver and you're trying to create, to get kind of network efficiencies, where you say, I want to link several trips. Well, those trips can come from multiple different apps. So you need to be on all of them if you really want to be able to do that. So it's still, even though these apps are helpful, there is still a major hassle. And so this is very much in transition, and clearly there's tons of potential for interesting market design questions kind of on all possible levels. Nope. I'm so short on time there. All right. Okay. So the next one that I want to talk about, and this one I'm going to talk very briefly because David is going to have a whole lecture on this, micromobility. Yeah? So these are pictures I took this morning outside of the hotel. I was curious how many different ones I would get. So there are a bunch of different ones. There are scooters, there are electric bicycles. It's very exciting because compared to cars, they use a lot less resources, right? It's just a super efficient way of transportation. So it's a very positive development. Well, except unless you're in France. So from last month, April 3rd, voters in Paris overwhelmingly by, so there was some claims that, there was non-selective people who showed up to vote, but still 89% of Parisians voted to just ban, like not restrict, just ban e-scooters. Okay, so clearly something failed in how this was designed. So there's clearly questions, how should we design it so that people, don't hate them and don't try to ban them. All right, third area that I think is potentially super interesting and that people in this room should be looking at, that poses a bunch of novel market design questions, is consumer delivery services. So I think DoorDash, Instacart, those types of services. So what makes it interesting, in addition to the things that I mentioned? Well, it's a three-sided market, right? So market designers are very good at one-sided markets, which is sort of auction, and two-sided markets, which is matching. This is a three-sided market, right? So you have customers, you have restaurants or stores, something delivered, and you have the delivery person. And you need to figure out how to jointly equilibrate those three markets, right? And I think if you look at how these platforms do pricing right now, it's very rudimentary. I think there's lots of room for improvement. Just to give you just pose a very basic question. Suppose, we're right now it's peak time and delivery people are very expensive. There is a shortage of delivery people. You have to do surge pricing for them. Well, so that means it's a higher price. How should you pass it through? Should you pass it through to the customer, to the restaurant? Should you try to eat this cost? But then what if your competitors don't? So lots of questions of that sort. And on top of this, the role of the platform itself is also very complex. It's not just kind of a neutral kind of bystander who is trying to match all of these. So I'll just show you one screenshot that I'm very happy about. And I think there is a paper to be written, at least one right here from the screenshot. So let me tell you what it is. This is Instacart. I went on Instacart and just searched for something fairly generic, San Pellegrino. Okay. So what I got a lot more. This is just a one screenshot. I got about 2,000 results. They're all very similar. They all look like this. So the first thing you notice, it's kind of obvious. You have these three stores, Bianchini, Sigona, and Zanotto's, who offer essentially identical goods. So that's one. That's not surprising. Here's, to an economist, a more interesting observation. Instacart doesn't show prices, right? So what they're doing is they're softening the competition among those stores. So clearly there is negative consumer surplus. They're artificial. It would be trivial for them to display those prices, but you know that would hurt other parts of their ecosystem. So they're artificially inflating consumer search costs. You know, I don't know how, like, what's the actual amount by how much it's searched. If you actually click through it, prices vary quite a bit. So there's probably a non-trivial amount of consumer surplus that's being destroyed by doing something like that. All right. So, but you know, maybe they're justified in doing things like that because it's also a very challenging market. And the main challenge there is that delivery is very labor intensive, right? So if I want to, you know, a couple of cases of San Pellegrino shipped to me, well, the cost of delivery is like way higher than the value of those goods. So someone needs to pay for that. And kind of the name of, and to make it sort of economically viable, the name of the game here is to try to bundle this delivery. And again, either deliver to multiple customers on one trip or deliver goods from multiple stores to one customer. They start doing that, you know, when you buy a restaurant order, sometimes they say, oh, wouldn't you like to also get something from Safeway? And this is very much this is sort of happening kind of as we speak, and sort of trying to figure out how to do that. And again, some goods can wait, right? If I'm ordering paper towels, you know, they can deliver them to me anytime. If I'm ordering something perishable, completely different thing. A restaurant, I want my food hot. So, and trying to elicit all of the preferences is also impossible. So there is this constant game of how to improve these markets, very much in flux. All right, I have 8.5 minutes left, so let me talk about the stuff that I'm working on, I'm very excited about. And those things are congestion pricing and carpooling. So congestion pricing, I have good news and bad news. So good news, I'm going to skip this area. This is bad news, but this is you knew that, so that's not news. So good news is that New York City is very much on track to implementing congestion pricing. So just last week, they cleared a major hurdle. The federal administration said, you know, no objections, environmental review passed, you know, go ahead. Okay. And how are they going to do this? What's the plan? Let me give you a very brief overview of their plan. So they're going to implement cordon pricing. So they're going to take this congestion zone, everything south of the 60th Street in Manhattan, and you're going to pay a certain amount of money to enter this congestion zone, right? So that's classic cordon pricing, right? You pay once just for entering, and then they kind of they're deciding on the level. Again, the main debates right now are what should be the level of congestion fee and who should be exempted. You know, obviously every single constituency, you know, teachers and firefighters and medical workers, they all argue that they are very important, they should be exempted. Not surprising that, you know, you will see that. That's a debate. So that's good news. And the basic intuition there that the policymakers have is, you know, cars bad, we want fewer cars, let's set a high toll, right? Not crazy, but as I'll argue in a moment, kind of in the modern world is not sufficient. So here's the bad news. So London did this a few years ago, okay? And it basically didn't work, right? So it worked in terms of generating a bunch of money, but it's, you know, this is from BBC from 2020, just a few months ago, remains one of the most congested cities in the world, okay? So what's going on? And you know, our view, and I'm working with Frank, who's somewhere here on the paper on this. This is And then we're also working with Michael Schwartz. I'll mention that paper later. In our view, the problem with this framework, it was the right framework in 1975 when Singapore introduced it, because that was kind of technologically the only thing you could do, essentially. But in 2023, this is just not the right framework because different cars, different vehicles cause dramatically different amounts of congestion per instance of crossing a corridor. Okay, it also matters when you travel, and pricing should reflect that, right? So I think the problem with London is a lot of these cars, they cross into the congestion pricing zone and keep driving, creating congestion. So, well, so you say, okay, now we know what to do. Econ 1 doesn't work. Let's do intermediate micro. So you do Pythagorean taxation. You figure out the optimal allocation of who should be where every moment of time, and you just charge people the externality for every cubic inch of space for every second, and you get to the first best. Okay, that's very clever, and obviously you're going in the right direction. But good luck doing that. Right, so this is the map of New York City with congestion as of the time when I took the screenshot. So like, should we have different prices on like every single intersection, every single corner, and also should we communicate all of these prices to people who just want to go to work from New Jersey? Like, do they wake up every morning and like look at every single thing on their path? So maybe yes. Actually, I'm not sure. Maybe, but with Frank, we're working on what we call a pragmatic approach. Hopefully, we'll have a paper soon. And our observation and idea is the following. So commuters, those who go to work, generate fairly similar amounts of congestion per entering and exiting the corridor zone, right? You cross at 7 a.m., you go, you park. Obviously, some of you have to go through the whole Manhattan, others park close to where you cross, but sort of comparable. And then you have fleet vehicles. You have FedEx, UPS, Fresh Direct, Uber, all of those, which generate an insane amount of congestion per unit of crossing. That's just their job, to like keep driving around. And so the proposal is for commuters. Yeah, it's okay to do corridor pricing for commuters. You should, you charge them for entering. Also, you should charge for exiting, because then if you don't, then you're not regulating evening traffic correctly. But basically, we can sort of abstract away from where exactly in Manhattan they're traveling and say, look, we'll live with this approximation because it simplifies their life dramatically. And then for the fleets, which is about half of New York traffic, if you just stand on a random corner, about half of the traffic are these fleets. You're going to charge more granular fees that are, obviously not to the extreme that I showed on the map, but somewhere in that direction, right? And and then economists at Uber and Lyft will figure out how to ingest those prices and then optimize based on that, right? That's the idea. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about in the last 3 minutes is carpooling. And there, carpooling, obviously, the technology itself is very old. You can put 2 people in the car. Where there is a huge change, potential change, is making it much easier to find convenient carpooling partners, right? Empirically, very few people carpool, even though when you're stuck in traffic, you can sit there and think, wouldn't it be wonderful? There are all these cars with 3 or 4 or 5 empty seats. If all the people carpool, it will be a great improvement. Everyone will be better off, but we don't do it. And one of the reasons, but probably not the only one, is that it's just really inconvenient to find those carpooling partners. And there is a lot of effort, lots of apps trying to move in this direction. So the first one here is Waze Carpool. If you're interested, you should talk to Michael Schwartz, who will tell you a lot more about the story of that. But there are others who try to do that. And here is, when I say carpooling, I don't necessarily mean that there is literally no paid driver. It's kind of any service that like stops short of like real public transportation with 50 people in a bus can have a driver, but they're carrying not one person, but 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, right? So kind of van pools would count. But basically, the whole name of the game here is to increase the throughput of the road while maintaining the actual road surface, right? Putting more commuters in the car. So this is Lyft, which was offering shared rides. They relaunched it after COVID about a year ago. And this is VIA that had this idea of van pools in New York City and DC. Okay, well, I have more bad news. And this is, I had a different quote, but I couldn't resist the temptation to put a quote that's less than 24 hours old. So that happened literally yesterday at 2 p.m. from Bloomberg. Lyft is officially discontinued sharing rides. And the same happened with VIA. They also discontinued it. And Waze is no longer doing that. So clearly, by itself, carpooling is not quite working. So why am I still super optimistic about this? And the reason for this is that congestion pricing and carpooling are highly complementary. So carpooling doesn't work. Now, congestion pricing could work, right? Obviously, if we set the price at $500, that will scare a lot of people away. And we'll hear about the Singapore experience where it does work. But people most directly affected are not better off. So drivers who get hit by those congestion fees, they used to waste time in traffic. Now they have to spend dollars, but the actual amounts, if you quantify them, and there's a beautiful paper by Victor doing that, are the same. So they're not better off. And in fact, what I didn't show you, I'll take one more minute. What I didn't show you is there is now huge opposition coming from New Jersey, right? So the governor of New Jersey, the senators from New Jersey are trying to kill this congestion pricing plan from New York because they're like, look, this is just a tax on citizens of New Jersey, and like this is like just a money grab. Okay, so now what I want you to kind of visualize, and this is what makes me hopeful, is the following: in the world where you have actual flexible congestion pricing, intelligent congestion pricing, and convenient carpooling, right? You could have moderate tolls at peak times where the goal is not to scare people away, but to force them to carpool. Right, and with that, and that's another paper I'm working on, which I've advertised a lot, so hopefully they will also be on my website. You can make people's lives better off, even if the government just destroyed the revenue, right? So unlike in the single driver world, and the intuition is very simple. Basically, you are carpooling with someone, which you incur small utility, but you're going to work much faster. Okay, and last slide, and I'm done. What makes me hopeful that this is not just a pipe dream is that we actually have some data points that suggest that might happen. I'll show you two. So the first data point actually comes from Singapore. There is a really neat paper by two World Bank economists, Poland and Watson, from 1977, who looked at what happened after the introduction of the very first Singapore congestion pricing scheme, which was, by the standard of that time, revolutionary. And now it looks pretty simple. There is a time interval when you have to pay. And so what they find is that the number of carpools increased just dramatically. And guess what? Here, to qualify as a carpool, you had to have 4 people in the car, right? So it was a pretty high bar, and sort of the number of carpools just skyrocketed. Now, the second data point is going to be from California, and of course, it's surprising. Like, we don't have intelligent congestion pricing in California, but there is something very similar that's going to serve as a proxy that I think we can learn lessons from, and that's parking. There is a really neat paper by Wilson and Shoup from 1990, where they looked at what happened when an employer stopped subsidizing parking. And so the cost of parking for employees went from $0 to $30 a month, which in current dollars is about $75 a month. So it's not insane, but it's also not negligible. It's about $1,000 a year. And they actually have several of those, but I picked this one because it's suburban LA, so there's just no public transportation. 0% of people use public transportation here. That's not feasible. And so what you see, almost all employees switched from driving solo to carpooling. Okay, so this size of monetary incentives can clearly induce that behavior, and that sort of serves as tolls. All right, sorry about running over time, and thank you.